Hello, it's Jessica Iclisoy, founder of California Baby from CB Greenhouse. We're doing a podcast today with Ray Olivares Jr. And Ray is the owner of Olivares Honeybees. It was established in 1986. He's a second generation beekeeper, and he specializes in queen bee production. So welcome, Ray. Today we're going to learn a lot about honeybees, why they're so special, why they're endangered, and a special project that California Baby and Olivares Honeybees is embarking on this Earth Day. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you because you are so knowledgeable about honeybees. So you're a second generation beekeeper.
Yes.
So that means, was that your first job?
No, I had other jobs. So my dad obviously started the business back in 1965. And there was a long period of time in there. I grew up
California,
actually.
native Californian?
Native California, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I actually grew up allergic to honeybees.
Oh, interesting. Are you still?
No.
Okay.
When I was about 17, I grew out of the anaphylactic reaction that I would get. And so
did you do anything by eating a little bit of honey or a little bit of stings, or did you do anything like that? I've heard some people have gone that route.
I would get shots of bee venom.
Right.
Once a month for about 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And that was more back in the 70s.
Okay. Was that helpful? Do you think that was helpful?
I think it was.
Kind of like a little homeopathic, right? Where you get a little bit of it and your body builds a resistance. Is that the idea?
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of people consider if they swell up that they're allergic to bees, and they're not. That's just the body's natural.
It's a histamine reaction.
Yeah. And I would quit breathing within 10 seconds, anaphylactic shock. That's being allergic.
Okay. That's the difference.
Swelling is it more of a discomfort, swelling up, and hives. Some people will get hives, but I eventually grew out of it, and I've been fine ever since.
Okay.
So,
good.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. It's funny because I don't have any of that situation. We have, you haven't been to our farm in Los Alamos, but I hear you will take a trip.
Yeah,
so I'm looking forward to showing you around. And we have, we've started to develop a French lavender field. So every year we're taking cuttings and we're expanding it. But when the lavender is blooming, it is filled with honeybees. I mean, we have calendula fields. They seem to really love the lavender, and I will go right into the field with the bees, right into the lavender, and they're buzzing around. And what I find is that they don't really care about me. They just go about their business. And I have never gotten stung because I feel like sometimes when people see bees, they have a little bit of a bad reputation. They're like, oh, there's a bee, there's a bee, there's a bee. And they get really scared and they start swatting. Should people do that, or how should they behave around honeybees?
Honeybees are like ants. They're preparing for the winter period.
Right.
And they are very busy. And generally the only time I get stung is when I accidentally lean back on a seat and there's a bee there, or squish them with my hand on accident, and
that's more of a defense mechanism, right? They'll.
Well, I'm actually pushing the stinger, so it's more of an accident. In the field, like you were talking about in the lavender, those bees don't care that you're there. They're busy working. Generally, where they get agitated is closer to home. They do protect their hive, but they're not like the Africanized bees. They're you have to really agitate them to make them come after you. When I see people swatting at bees,
yes,
it's more that it seems like the bees are out of place, or they're a little mischievous. They're looking for, I don't want to call it a free meal, but maybe soda cans are sitting around.
The sugar.
They're after sugars and stuff like that. And as soon as people swat at them, they can become agitated. But I always just put my hand up like this and just, shadow the bee, and then it goes away. So all you got to do.
What do you do? What are you trying to accomplish by doing that? You're putting it around your head, like you just kind of.
Well, usually that's where they're going when they're bothering people, is they're going to get caught in their hair. That's what they're worried about.
Okay.
And then they get stung. So I just put my hand up and kind of shield the bee like this.
You block them a little bit, but you don't have to swat them. You're just blocking their, where they're going. Okay.
Exactly. Change your interest.
Okay. And so honeybees, just a little bit of an education, honeybees, I know farmers really rely on bees, and I know that you take your bees all around for almond groves, and you go to, you're based up in Chico, California?
Yes.
Okay, which is the northern part of California, which is a beautiful part of California, and then you transfer them to Montana. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And Hawaii.
So our season kind of looks like this. The bees are overwintered from October till January in Northern California, just out in the fields, and we call bee yards locations. And these are landowners that allow us to set bees on their property. Mm-hmm. Then we go into almond pollination, which is the single largest pollination event in the world. There's about 1.3 million acres of almonds that need pollinated, and they need 2 hives per acre. So there's only about 400,000 hives in the state of California. The other 2 million hives need to come from out of state. So they come from all over the United States to pollinate the almonds.
Now, almonds are not self-pollinating. They need the bees to pollinate it. Is that correct?
Yes. So 80% of the pollination is done by honeybees. The almond pollen is too heavy for the wind to carry it. So there's like 2 to 3 varieties in an orchard. So they're not self-compatible, but they do have new varieties that are self-compatible, not self-pollinating, but self-compatible. So when the bee goes to the tree, it can go from flower to flower within that tree and pollinate.
Okay.
With most of the varieties out there right now, one row will be a pollinator, then 2 rows of the nonpareils, which are the money makers in the almond world. And
the female, are they the female tree? Or do they look at it that way between the trees, male and female?
I can't answer that. I think it's a transfer of pollen from one variety to the other that needs to occur. Yeah, I don't think male or female. So there are, they are now trying to, it's about efficiency. And so when you have one variety of tree that is self-compatible, you still need the bees to transfer the pollen. The other 15 to 20% of the pollination, there's a little bit of wind that if the wind blows hard enough, ants, flies, praying mantises, other natural insects.
They help a little bit.
They're not as efficient, because that window, the first 20 hours of blossom, is the most viable time for the pollen. So
it's got to happen at a certain time.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so that's really great, and that's interesting. So let me give you a little background of how, we met. I actually met your son Ryan and your daughter-in-law Ruby, and I was looking for bees for our farm, and it was really hard to find them. It was about 2 years. You can't just Google beehive and all of a sudden you get a delivery of bees. And I came across your company, and I reached out, and we're doing something really interesting this year. And so maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So I received one hive, the first year, because my farm manager had experience, but I thought, let's take it slow. Let's start with one hive. We put it up on our top field, which has calendula and lavender, and we thought, that would be great. And we also have an orchard, and we have a pond. So there's, it's 100 acres, so there's plenty of space for the bees. And the bees did very, very well. Up until a point, when it looked like we were ready to harvest some honey, we went to go check on them, and the hive was empty.
Yeah.
And we thought, what happened? Like, was it a coyote? Was this a bear came and ate? We didn't know, and we were kind of warned. Ryan did warn me about the like a bee collapse and the mites that can take place. And but I thought, this is an organic farm. I don't think that would happen. And they looked like they were thriving so much. So what happened to us?
Well, there's a lot of there's a lot of possibilities. If the hive, so you got a package, 3-pound package of bees, and
Yep.
installed them into the hive.
Yep.
And I think Ryan gave you some feed to
Yep.
feed them.
Yeah, Ryan came, he started it off, he gave us a training, and everything, again, everything went well for months until.
It's okay. That's what I was going to ask you, how long. And so that means the queen did get established.
Yeah.
And probably started laying eggs. And so a good queen will lay 1,500 to 3,000 eggs a day.
Wow.
And that cycle's about 21 days on the brood cycle. So you have bees hatching all the time.
Okay.
Depending on where you're at, the feed is very important. One of the things that we're up against in the bee industry is just a lack of forage.
Right. Meaning even just weeds, right? The forage could just be dandelions or just cover crop, that kind of thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Very important. Bees near the city do very well because a lot of gardens and a lot of people planting flowers and different things like that. So the varroa mites, see, the honeybees that are here in North America are European honeybees,
right.
Apis mellifera. Okay. So the mite came from Apis cerana, which is the Asian honeybee. Oh. So the mite transferred to a whole nother species. And so Apis cerana had millions of years of defense organisms,
to evolve. Yeah.
So our bees have no defense for them at all. And that's what we're, as queen breeders, we're not breeding for resistance because it's not a hereditable trait. It over time it will be, but tolerance, environmental tolerances. So reoccurring natural selection, which means the beekeeper we work with in Canada, for 25 years, he's bred bees on survivor stock. So these bees have shown over the years through selection that they can withstand environmental changes better than most bees. And that's just through selection of traits.
Right.
So that's what we're working on constantly to improve the honeybees. But so at some point you just need to treat your bees. And there are
when you say treat your bees, what do you mean by treat your bees?
Well, you need to monitor them first to make sure you understand your mite levels within the hive. And
so they're always going to have the mite, right? We back up and you just tell me what the mite does. So the mite is a parasite. Is that what it is? And it attaches to the bee?
Yes, it's about the size of a CD. If you put your hand on your chest, which is about the size of a CD, that's how big the mite is on the honeybee. And they puncture into the bee and feed off its blood. Or actually, it's not its blood. It feeds off its fat bodies. We just learned this in the last year. It's not actually the blood. It's the fat bodies. And so that's
the fat bodies, which sounds to me like a lipid layer or a layer that protects the outer part of the bee. So it punctures that part and then starts feeding under the layer.
Exoskeleton. And then the fat bodies is the energy or the protein that the bees feed the larva.
Mm-hmm.
So
I see.
Viruses are one of the things. So the mites are the vector for the viruses. Bees have had viruses for millions of years, but the bees never had the stressors to allow the viruses to express themselves. And the easiest way for me to explain viruses and honeybees now to people is compare COVID-19 to the viruses that honeybees have. Honeybees that have underlying conditions, health problems, are the most susceptible to the viruses.
So if it's not a strong hive, it's more susceptible?
and poor nutrition,
Poor
which
nutrition.
leads to a weak immune system and leaves them susceptible to viruses and different pathogens.
Okay.
And so nutrition is probably one of the most important things. And then also understanding your mite levels. And you can do that with ways of not hurting the bees. Online, there's all kinds of examples. Randy Oliver is a scientificbeekeeping.com. He's a great source for natural products and commercial and hobby level.
Okay.
So it's Randy Oliver, scientificbeekeeping.com.
Okay. Great. And we'll have a link to that too.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I'm learning. What you just talked about is because I reached out to Ryan and said, what happened? And, so now I'm getting a deep dive education, and we are going to try this again this season. And actually this season, we're going for 10 hives. And so either we're crazy, but we're actually going to have a method to our madness. So, and what we're going to be doing with you is we're going to be, whether with you or with Ryan, we are going to do Instagram lives kind of like every Friday, and we're going to be checking on our bees, and Ryan is going to try to mimic what we're doing on your farm. And so we're trying to do the same thing, And then he's going to give me an update with what's happening with him. I'm going to give him an update what's happening with us. So this season, we're going to put our bees in our orchard. And so the orchard has citrus, stone fruit, olive trees, and like all the trees that will grow in our area. We're in the Central Coast. And we also, down the way from the orchard, is a pond. So there's the water source for the bees. We always plant cover crops, but then we till them under, or we just kind of let them dry and protect the soil. And this year we're going to plant cover crop and keep it alive year round, if we can, for a food source. So you were mentioning a food source. So what kind of cover crop or what kind of plants should we seed? And there was also a resin that he had mentioned. There's a plant that provides like a little bit of a resin that the bees can go to. So we were going to look into that.
Well, most plants, so that's called, there's different ways of pronouncing it. I call it propolis.
Yeah, propolis,
and
exactly.
That's the resin. Yeah. And so actually propolis is medicinal.
Humans can use propolis, right?
For a lot. Yeah, it's antimicrobial, antibacterial.
And how is that harvested? How do you harvest propolis? Is it just sit on the top and you shake it out or something?
No, what it is the bees use it to seal all the gaps in their colony. Whether it's a tree, they'll close the entrance down and they'll use propolis it'd be like using mortar in between bricks. Okay. Just happens to have medicinal values to it. And we used to breed that out of the bees' traits. Then we found that it's very important. Well, because it's very sticky when it's hot. Yeah. To where your fingers, you can hardly manipulate your fingers.
Okay. So it was hard to work with them. It was hard to work.
It got all over everything. And when it's cold, it turns like peanut brittle. Yeah. So it's very important, to have that. But
but bees, honey, and we can just digress a little bit. Honey is actually very healthy for us, right? I mean, as humans, eating a little bit of real honey, raw honey, not something that's basically sugar water. And I heard that it's actually good to eat honey from your area. So instead of eating honey that is grown, in Australia or something like that, because the value would be that you're getting a little bit of the pollen in your immediate area, so for allergies or something like that. Is that something you've heard? Is that
yeah. We cannot make claims to that.
Yeah.
When we sell our honey, but I think there's There's logic in it.
Yeah.
Eating the pollens. The thing that you need to remember is that, like even in California and even Montana, where our bees make honey in Montana in the plains and along the prairies and along the rivers there, we have the same plants there as we have here.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, whether it's mustard or fillory or fiddleneck, alfalfa, sweet clover, a lot of those things are in the same area. If you want to plant plants, find shrubs and trees that bloom at different times to fill the gaps.
Right. So continuous food source year
Yeah,
round.
there's a great I think it's called coyote brush. I'm not sure. It's a native California plant. It blooms late fall.
Okay.
And I can always find out for you the exact name of it, but it blooms along the river. It grows along the rivers, and it has a pollen source and a little bit of a nectar source for the bees. But pollen is it's really important to bees. You could almost feed them high fructose corn syrup. As long as they've got some natural pollen coming in, they're pretty healthy. But it's understanding during those dearths, knowing when those times occur to supplement, feed them if you need to.
So it sounds like one has to be very observant of the hive and the natural world. What's going on, what's blooming, what the weather is like. Are they affected by weather, cold or rain or any of that?
Definitely, yeah. Just they're kind of like snakes and some other insects. Although snakes not insect, but when it gets cold, snakes can't move because of their skeletal makeup.
Right.
So bees, you could have a thunderstorm, a beautiful day, and have a thunderstorm if you're in a mountainous area. And as soon as it cools down or the clouds go behind the sun goes behind the clouds, you'll just see them just light down. And they could stay there overnight sometimes as long as it doesn't get too cold. And still make it home the next day. But the weather affects them. And then, but knowing your area and find a book in fact, there's a book you can get that has all the native flowering plants in California, and find the ones that are suitable to your region.
Okay, so that brings up a good point because you run a commercial operation. I run a commercial operation really for the flowers and the plants and herbs that we use in our skincare products. I don't run a commercial operation for bees, so I would put myself into like a home bee enthusiast, right? And I'm sure there's tons of them, especially now with COVID. People are at home, they're gardening. And so do you sell your bees for like the home enthusiast?
Yeah. So, up until COVID, we had a hobby day, Sideliner Hobby Day. And it started out with about 200 people 10 years ago. And I think the last year, which would have been 19, I guess, we had about 3,500 people show up.
That's great.
We have distributors all over, not all over the U.S., but mostly, they've been keeping bees on the East Coast for years. It's relatively new to the West Coast.
That's strange.
Like everything.
That's just, is it just because the West Coast is like newer and the East Coast? What? Yeah. I mean, we've had orchards for, since what, like the mid 1800s here, right? Oranges and stuff. And
well, I think the bees on the West Coast may have come with this, the missions, the explorers.
Yeah.
The bees on the East Coast, I believe, came with the Pilgrims.
Okay, so they've been there longer, and they've
been there longer. And then on the East Coast, and I'll include Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania. A lot of those states, if you have so many acres, a small ranch, 4 or 5 acres, and you have some kind of agricultural livestock, which bees are, there's tax exemptions for that. So there's a lot of reasons for them to have the bees out there. But what we saw in 2008 when the economy tanked, we saw a lot of people go towards growing their own fruits and vegetables and realizing they didn't have the bees to pollinate
So they were doing home gardening. You mean the home gardener, right? But they weren't having successful crops, and they probably didn't know why. And the missing link was the bees.
Yeah, the mites, when they first came to the U.S., when wiped out about 90% of the feral colonies in the U.S. We got her in Hawaii for about 8 years before the varroa mites showed up over in Hilo. And they spread across the island in about a week. And they figured there was 750,000 to 1 million wild swarms on the island. It wiped them all out within a month. And now they're coming back naturally just through survivor stock. And the beekeepers like us,
right.
Our breeding programs and things like that.
And so what you mentioned is, everybody should, if you're a home or you're a hobbyist, you should look for your native plants and look to plant those. So if I'm planting clover, let's say.
Yeah, good plant.
Does that grow on the East Coast, clover?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, they should be looking for their native plants that they should be feeding. They should look to feed their bees with that.
They can supplement it, because a honeybee will fly 3 to 5 miles.
3 to 5 miles. Okay.
So before I even get to a bee yard, say I'm going to go work a bee yard in the foothills, as I'm driving out there, I'm looking at the forage of what the bees have available to them way before I get to where
so you almost can predict how it's going to play out, right? If you're looking at the forage in your mind, you're probably going, oh, it needs a little bit more of this, or it needs a little bit more of that.
Yeah. Or if we're in a drought, take last year, for example, we had over 2 million acres burn in California, and we're in a drought. We're still in a drought. And so it's even more difficult to keep bees unless you're supplementing them. And Man Lake, so we get most of our supplies from Man Lake Beekeeping Supply Company. And
where is that out of?
They're the largest supplier of bee products in the world, basically. Okay. So they're out of Hackensack, Minnesota, but they have a facility in Woodland, California.
Okay.
Texas, Florida.
Like national distribution.
Kentucky, yes. And then they can ship anywhere.
Right.
And so that's where we get our supplemental feeds from them. Pre-made pollen patties, syrup.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Need protein. They need carbohydrates, which they get from the sugars.
Okay.
Naturally, they would get it from the nectar and the flowers.
Right.
But when
everything was perfect, you mean? If everything was perfect, the flowers are a whole food for them?
Part of the recipe.
Part of the recipe. Okay.
Part of the recipe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They need.
I think I kind of had this attitude of like, well, this farm is organic, meaning like everything is perfect. So of course it's going to go just perfectly well. So are there organic choices? Because I know one of the options is you would have to spray the bees for mites. Am I correct on that? Or how does that work?
Well, there are all kinds of treatments. So there's manufactured treatments, which are usually they're strips, but they'll have it as miticide, which is just everything. The red flags go up. You're killing an insect on an insect.
Right.
Not what we want to do, but in order to keep the food supply going and commercial beekeepers alive, beekeepers have been using that for quite a while, but we're learning more. There's a lot of, oxalic acid, that formic acid, those are both chemicals. I'll call them chemicals because I'm not a researcher or scientist, but that are natural in honey plants. And there are methods of using those naturally that will kill the mites. The problem with the early use of those is it might be 75% effective. I can't have 75%. I need 90% because we're running a business and we have employees, and we need predictability because the the demand for the queens, you can only raise queens in certain areas of the country. The rest of the country, they rely on us to produce the queens so they can continue with their new hives. So,
but it doesn't sound sustainable. It sounds like a Band-Aid. It sounds like you're just doing it. The farmers are doing it because they need their almonds to be pollinated. You're spraying them, you're producing the queen, they get it pollinated, they might die, and then we start all over again. Is that right? Or accurate?
Just about anything. That's where we're at. The variables are so great that what you just said is has a lot of truth to it. But then there's also, it depends on how you want to manage your bees and what you want to expose yourself to. But the pollination is very important because it's not just the almonds, it's all your fruits, most of your fruits and vegetables and all these things that you need seeds to plant, the pollination to plant. So the pollination is critical. We're using a product, right? We're using oxalic acid right now ourselves in a natural way.
Right.
And we're hoping it works, but we're monitoring our bees. We're doing alcohol washes weekly to see the mite levels on our bees so we don't let them go over that threshold that will bring on the viruses, weaken the bees' immune systems, or vice versa.
Doing more damage than good, right? Or doing too much damage.
On a hobby level, though, you can easily manage your bees organically.
Okay, how's that?
There's lots of products. There's, you can do sugar washes. You'd have to look this up we don't have enough time to talk about that, but
yeah, no. And actually that's our project. This season, is to develop a system, so we're going to work to develop this system and find out what works, what doesn't work. So, and we'll share that, with everybody and do updates as we go along.
You said something. I think I just realized it clicked what you were saying. On a commercial level, some of the hobby level beekeeping is not sustainable. You couldn't run a bit. You could not run a commercial. It would eat you alive on your cost.
Okay.
But that's what we're continuously working on through breeding, selection of traits.
And you're doing it because you have like the scale to be able to do it. Is that why you can do it commercially?
Yeah, and then we pollinate the almonds. That's the first thing we do. Then we start raising queens, and we ship queens all over the United States and Canada, even a few foreign countries. We provide package bees and nukes to people that.
So you're diversified. You're diversified because that's.
Then we go to Montana. Yeah, then we go to Montana and make honey. Right. Or hope to make honey. It's not a given from year to year. But we also go to Montana.
That's always so mysterious about why I'd be like, you have bees, you get honey.
Yeah.
That's not the case?
No. I'll be honest with you. Like in our area in Northern California where we're at, there's too many cows on the same pasture. I'll use that analogy. There's a demand for bees for pollination, especially the almonds. So that creates more opportunity for new beekeepers. But in order for the bees to survive just on the environment, you cannot have too many mouths on the same flower.
Right. Okay. So the cows are eating all the flowers.
Now, that's why we go to California to get them out of the agricultural areas, because a lot of our forage has been taken up by orchards and farming and development, whether it's subdivisions or whatever. So a lot of the fertile Sacramento Valley, and then the pesticide use is so heavy in fungicides as part of the agricultural, sustainability, that it's not a good environment for the honeybees. So to offset that, we go to Montana, where we don't have the sprays. So even our Montana honey that we produce there, we have dedicated boxes that collect the honey. The bees put the honey in.
Okay.
And those are used just to produce the honey, to bring it and then extract it. Okay. And so these bees are in the prairies and along the Yellowstone River and the Madison and different places like this that they don't use any. There's no sprays.
It's still very wild there, right? It is.
Yeah, it's dry land farming because it's a lot of cattle ranches. So it's the way it was 200 years ago, 100 years ago. And so it's a really healthy environment for the bees. And because we take them there where they're healthier, when we bring them back, they're not as susceptible to the stress of being in California. And we're able to consistently produce the queens that people need. Otherwise, if we're not able to do what we need to do, there's a shortage now. And if it affects us, I guarantee you it's affecting somebody else.
Right.
Other producers. Yeah.
And that's a little surprising to me because in my mind, I'm biased to California, but I feel like we're, I don't know what the percentage is, but I feel like we have a lot of organic farms. A lot of people are very environmentally, aware. But I guess the agriculture here must still be very conventional.
Well, yes and no, because a lot of the new generation of farmers, my kids' age, they're understanding more and more the effect of what the environment has on what they're doing. And we have a lot of growers. The Almond Board of California, they have the best management practices for almond growers for the bees while they're in the orchards. They're trying to get them to spray at night and plant cover crops back into the orchards so the bees.
There's some education going on.
Well, there's a pile of it going on.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good news.
Yes, it's very good news. Yeah. And there's my old business partner and I, maybe 20 years ago, we started a Project Apis mellifera, which is PAM, and it's still going today. And they do a lot of things with like UC Davis and other universities for trying to get the growers to plant back forage for the bees and just help the environment in general.
And it doesn't cost a lot, really. It doesn't cost a lot to do that, right? It's comparatively speaking. I mean, let's take almonds, for example. They're an expensive, they get a good dollar for that. To put some cover crop is not that expensive.
Depends on who you talk to.
I know. But, coming from me, some people don't want to spend anything. They don't want to put anything into their infrastructure.
Some don't, but most of them are starting to go environmental friendly now.
Right, because they have to. I mean, I find they have to.
I agree.
Okay, so I want to touch on, get a little feminist here on you and talk about the queen bees. So I think just when I started learning about the queen bees, and we all hear about that, but we really don't know how awesome and powerful the queen bee is. And also the other thing that I found that was interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't all the other bees female and they only use a male? Like can you just, women are going to be like, oh my God, I knew it.
So what you have is a queen and there's only one queen per colony.
Okay.
And
these are all good rules of thumb for life, right? One queen per colony. So
the queen is the only bee in the hive that's fertilized.
Okay.
And she was fertilized by the drone. So the drones in the hives are the male bees, and they're larger. And the male bees, basically, the only purpose for the drones is for mating in the springtime, for nature to continue. So bees, this time of the year, they grow really fast, and they do it, and they'll get so crowded within the colony that they'll raise a new queen. And once that queen hatches, the old queen and the old bees leave and start another colony.
Okay. And how many drones start off in a hive?
It depends on the strength of the colony, but I'm going to say there might be 1,000 drones in a hive. And
do they all work? Do they all have a purpose, or they're just backups?
The drones do absolutely nothing. In fact, they can't even feed themselves. So in the wintertime.
Wait a minute. This is okay. The male drones can't feed themselves.
The worker bees feed the male drones. About
So
the only
worker
thing the
bees
drones
feed them.
do. Yes, about the only thing besides mating in the springtime or in the fall, as long as they have drones, if they lose a queen, they'll raise a new queen, and she has to go out and get mated. And so there's always a supply of drones in the hive. But if they ever get really short on feed, especially going into the fall, they'll kick the drones out and right out the front door.
That's crazy. I mean, it's such an efficient system. I mean, it's a ruthless system also, right. Isn't it?
So the worker bees are all female and they're unfertilized. Okay. But they can lay eggs, but they're unfertilized. So they'll turn out to be drones, the eggs that do hatch from a worker bee. But so the queen bee, she rules or manages the hives by pheromones. And it's not a scent. It's she leaves it at wherever she walks. She leaves, I guess, a scent or pheromones.
Right.
And if she's removed from the hive will know within so many minutes that they're queenless. And they'll pick a few larvae that are the right age and start feeding royal jelly.
Wow. And royal jelly
will make her into a queen. I don't know I should know this stuff, but
well, it's so fascinating. I mean, it almost sounds like it's like a King Arthur's court. It sounds very Machiavellian also. It's interesting how nature, is so practical.
Yes, very. And I think sometimes we overthink a lot of things. Common sense goes a long ways with keeping bees. Just understanding the environment and the seasons and things like that. If you're aware of those things and you pay attention to what your plants around you are doing, you'll know what the bees are doing too at the same time.
Got it. So it's just being observant and it's being conscious. It's kind of like everything in life, right? Just slowing down a little bit, being conscious of your surroundings and just, paying attention. We're so distracted with our telephones and everything else that sometimes it's hard to just pay attention,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beekeeping's a passion.
It's a passion.
The guys that are good at it have a passion for it's growing. It's taking care of something and nurturing it and being successful at it. And and there's no calendars to honeybees. It's about the environment and Mother Nature.
Right. So you're following the cycle. So if spring comes a little late, it comes a little late, or if it comes a little early. So they're following the cycles.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good
That's fascinating. Okay, well, I think that we covered a lot today, and I feel like we are going to have more conversations going forward. If you're available, maybe if we have some trouble at the California Babies Farm, and we need some troubleshooting, and maybe we can hop on another podcast, and you can help us troubleshoot through that.
Yeah, great. I look forward to it.
Well, wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being my guest today. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Good luck on everything.
Thank you. We need it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.